here, I think we're trying to balance between, nobody here needs to go out and sell these projects to individuals right now. What we need to first do is figure out, are these projects valuable? Both at a municipal level and at a personal level. So the questions for the homeowners could evaluate, if they're what their value system is based on. But if we want to build these projects up at this larger scale, we need to make sure that we have hard data as far as is this valuable? Within what's the context? The context is right now, this is what water is worth per gallon. This is what people are spending on these projects. How does the ROI make sense? What are the similar conversations going on in the solar industry? Because that's a good place to look.
Yeah.
And
what conditions need to change in order for to bear fruit.
Exactly.
The Bioregional Center's interest in this, to address part of what you were getting at when you first started this round of discussion, you made the parallel to the site suitability of land for urban agriculture. Mm-hmm. I'm viewing this sort of as the same sort of way, that if you look at households, but not just households, schools, churches, whatever it might be, recreation facilities, are they site suitable for some kind of land modification that would make us more water secure? And so in order to do that, you have to take into account the larger watershed issues, the sort of hydro shape of the landscapes. You'd have to then bring in ecosystem analysis to that. That's what Fei Young is good at doing. And then you begin to sort of look at the values that need to be changed. Because if we're just working with business as usual, you might not get your return on investment. But if suddenly there's an understanding that these are the kind of functions that one will get if you install this type of localized water infrastructure compared to that type in this particular area, then there should be some sort of compensation for the benefit that provides downstream.
Well,
right?
There's also municipal benefit, right? Which is that's where you can kind of conglomerate certain areas. They have certain storm drain characteristics.
That's right.
They have certain, they're processing wastewater in certain ways, it's all going to one location or whatever. And it's at that level, that's another level that I think there's a value system that needs to be thoroughly evaluated, which is there's other places in, that do greywater rebates based on your sewer fee.
Yeah.
Right? So right now everybody's got a base water fee and they've got sewer fees built into that. And so people that are disconnecting their greywater from the wastewater stream are still, paying full price, but they're not utilizing the wastewater facilities at the same rate. And so, there is a benefit communally or to the wastewater or to our, shared tax basis of hey, if everybody disconnects a little bit, now we're not using our system so hard, and so our taxes are not going to go up, maintenance costs aren't as high, we don't have to build more infrastructure. And so I think there's levels at that level.
Absolutely. You're mentioning municipal. The way we're imagining it as the Bioregional Center is the need for a new institutionalism. So the students actually did an analysis of the latest and greatest water quality improvement plans, which is interesting because they're aggregating different jurisdictions. It's a different territorial frame. So we want to bring into this a problematize the jurisdictional boundaries and how we can find ways to get a new legal institutional terrain surrounding this, right? Because what we have currently is broken. So that's a good example. Looking at the municipalities, what might they gain from a more intelligent approach to doing water security, and how do they have to align them with different elements in the region to make that happen?
And I will say, and I don't know if I already said this in the class, but the whole rain barrel rebate program, that in San Diego came about because of the stormwater department kind of doing a pilot project to see if we prioritize this kind of education and promote rain barrels, is that going to benefit our stormwater quality issues? and it built from there. But because it came from the stormwater department with the purpose of keeping the stormwater clean and reducing stormwater pollution, all of that, it wasn't really built to offset, to do water conservation. Like they're just concerned about keeping water out of the storm drain. They're not actually worried about how people use it, if people use it, if it's useful for people. And so that disintegration is kind of a little bit is actually a big problem. So finding ways to tell this story in ways where it's like, okay, stormwater already gets that this is maybe helpful. Maybe they're not implementing their strategies exactly right, but they already realize this. Now, how about water providers? Like, how can they be brought into the conversation and seeing the value? Well, they probably can't because they want to sell water, So anyway, there's just all this.
No, but that's great because it makes me think as well that ultimately what the research university can do, if it's a rooted research university where there's bandwidth and commitment and incentives for faculty and researchers to do problem-solving, solutions-oriented research in our region, then we're beginning to look at, well, how do we improve from a planning perspective, planning and design? How do we improve planning and decision-making? So when you begin to think about water and maybe a community is faced with the challenge of, to meet our climate action goals, should we be planting more trees or should we be doing more sort of localized water infrastructure to avert the cost of hauling water from far away and all the economic, so there's like, it's a complicated thing, right? You can do both.
You hold the water locally and then you can water your street trees without having to bring in municipal resources to keep your trees, which was a big conversation for the state of California, by the way. Department of Water Resources literally had to field all of these questions about when they were doing drought kind of modifications and like having different municipalities have to like make changes to how their demand is on the water resources. One of the biggest pushbacks was like, oh, well, we're going to have to kill off all of our street trees because, we have to irrigate less. And so there was a bunch of us on there saying like, no, don't kill the street trees. It's like shooting yourself in the foot, but there are ways to use these opportunities to help you get everything that you need, but building that, incentives and
these things intersect, right? So how do you create a governance process for making these decisions, these trade-offs? We don't really currently have the ability to do that very well.
Well, it's market driven, so it's really hard for us to make good decisions when it's really at the end of the day about making a buck. Yep.
And so working within that context, how do we make the world a better place? Well, we could start by getting out into the community.
But anyway, this site is really interesting because it's been worked on by a couple different people and it's evolved over the years. It recently got an addition, so this part of the house kind of came out. During that time, it was the only time that we could possibly get shower gray water from this house because all of these houses are on slab foundations, and that means the plumbing's under the house, under concrete, and so we can't bring the water out into the garden. But because this was being built, and she had the foresight to think about this, we were able to get a permit for a very low-cost passive gray water system. It's hard to show you the details of it because it's all like under mulch. But it really is as simple as we got the shower water rerouted to the outside of the building to a three-way valve that's located below grade that allows the water to get switched back to the sewer if it's raining and everything's wet, or if they're going to use products that they don't want out in their garden, like bleach, to clean the showers. The water then just travels through a pipe right out to here, and I think it's actually right here. And then it splits into two directions. So half the water floods a actual trench here that is filled with mulch. The mulch acts like a sponge, so it absorbs all of the stuff. But the shower is draining things like dead skin, hair, people pee in their showers, soap, all of that stuff. The microbes in a healthy soil system will take all of that, chew it up, and turn it into nutrients for your surrounding vegetation. So she had some struggling trees here before. we put the Greywater system in, and the trees are starting to pop now. So they struggled for many, many years here until the Greywater came out. So Greywater is draining into these 2 trenches and basically feeding all of this area. So this site was cool because this was the first permitted Greywater system in San Diego that was so passive. All the other systems have like collection tanks and pumps because of the way that they translate the code, that they thought that was what you needed to do, but we were able to do this passively, which is a much more economical strategy for people. Obviously not having pumps and things like that. So that's one thing. We're gonna go around to the back and I'll just tell you kind of how things evolved. They built an ADU back there. We tried to get laundry Greywater in during that ADU construction. But yeah, so, you know, working with the contractor and trying to make sure all the pipes were in place during the process, making sure that grandma was gonna use the right products. I think the laundry system got abandoned, but then we ended up tying in the bar sink. There's like a bar sink in here. During construction, we couldn't have the bar sink going outside because it's not allowed to have kitchen sink water out in, you know, for your Greywater. But we put all the infrastructure in so that as soon as they got the inspectors all out of here, we tied the bar sink in to drain into where the laundry system was going. Other than that, you'll see these things up on the gutters. These are for rainwater collection. It's hard to imagine how the water is going to get all the way from here to where I'm going to show you. But because these pipes are all glued up, it acts like a hose, like a sealed hose or a sealed tube. And this is the high point, even by just a couple of inches, where the water drains in and gets filtered. And then the water fills up in this sealed tube until it reaches a low spot, which is the inlet of the tank, and then it just pours in there. So the water just fills the tube, kind of like a lake inside of a tube, and just goes out the overflow. So as we're walking back, I'll just kind of point out how things evolved out there, and then once you see everything, you can just ask me questions. Some of this is non-typical, but most of it, I mean, this is pretty typical, you know.
I noticed you got a screen there because one of the concerns with first flush and all that, at bird or whatever, but that deals with that somehow.
The leaf filter makes sure that big stuff is screened out. We do generally put first flushes on most of our systems. These particular parts were here, or like this one was here from the original installation, which by the way was super fun because my friends got like one of those scissor lifts, and we put this 2,500 gallon tank up on the scissor lift, and we went up with it on the roof, pushed it over the back side of the roof and all the way down the other side. And so that original tank got installed by my friends. And then after some things, we moved that one to another site and put in more tanks. So that's kind of the evolution. But let's head on back this way. So, you know, it's kind of hard to imagine you can fit 1,000 gallons into a spot like this.
How many? Well, is it full now? It must.
Solid. This one, when we had to come back and rework the system, this was completely covered in the grapevine. So you didn't even know, you would have walked right by it and not even known it was here. So this one is now collecting from those front two. You see the downspouts there. Her roof line changed, so we had to add some filters, but there's those two, the one over there, and then this one are all going into this system, which then overflows and goes out to the big tank in the back. They also brought in, I guess, this one. So they did some of, you know, it was like a mishmash. We did some work, they did some work, other people did some work. But the basic design, this is the first flush diverter, so after the big stuff gets caught by that leaf filter, some of the smaller stuff like the bird poop, dust, pollen, ash from fires, you know, whatever, asphalt from the roof, that all kind of falls out into this, and then this fills up and overflows with clean water there, and then this is just a clean out point. But okay, so she's got 1,000 gallons here, and then if we keep walking back, No. So from over here, you can actually see tanks in two directions. This one is the 2,500 gallon tank. And then there's a 530 gallon slimline, which is one that a lot of people seem to like. It's because of its slimmer shape. But anyway, the way all of these tanks is interconnected is kind of complicated. So, you know, if you really want to understand it, I can draw it out for you. But tanks overflow into each other and they're tied together at the bottom. And you can kind of use water from one tank or any of several locations, but all the water kind of keeps overflowing into each other until here, where it can then overflow into the canyon. And I don't know if they've kept the infrastructure. Oh, it's like right here. So it kind of like a little basin should be kind of like driving the water this way so it goes safely out to the canyon, not hopefully flooding grandma's house or their house, you know, but kind of moving its way to the canyon without just flowing straight downhill and causing erosion or landslides, but kind of slowly working its way out. So that's that. And then the area with the trees right there, that's where the bar sink kind of drains out into as well.
Is this all gravity feed, or is there some kind of pump needed here,
Well,
right?
right now, I mean, what we put in is all gravity feed. So if they put a pump in, it's just something they picked up from Home Depot and kind of slotted in. So this one doesn't have any sophisticated distribution system, but they're pretty committed to like being engaged with it. So that's kind of what's happening.
I guess for the front yard, when you were talking about how it just into that trench, it just dumps all the water. Is that more effective to getting water to plants than like a drip system would be if you were to hook up like a drip hose to it and then run it through? Is that
Well,
natural with the water?
it's more cost effective, we'll put it that way. So, I mean, the homeowner here, the main cost she bore was the cost of being the first, as far as like permitting, in a certain way. But
So how long ago was it?
a couple years.
Oh, it's a couple
It
years.
wasn't the first system ever. It was the first system that we got permitted that was just purely gravity.
I see.
And so most people who want those kinds of systems here don't bother with a permit because that already blows the cost out of the water. You know, it's like $2,500 or whatever to like draft and submit the plans and, you know, and all of that. And I would be surprised if her system cost that much, actually, because it was mostly like digging out the dirt and then a little tiny bit of plumbing for those pipes, you know, and some coordinating with the contractors to make sure the pipes came out of the foundation right. But when you said the word effective, do you mean to get the plants watered?
I guess, yeah, that's what I was.
Well, drip systems are really good at saving water, saving clean water, basically. So if you have gray water, you can't really put it into a drip system unless you filter it substantially. So once you filter it substantially, you're kind of in a pumping mode already because you have to pump it through a filter and then pump it into the drip system to get the right pressure. That blows the cost completely out of the water. So that's, I mean, you're looking at something more like a $7,000 to $10,000 system, plus like very high maintenance as far, you know, in terms of like once a month or once every 6 weeks, cleaning really gross filters. So as far as effective, you know, I think in our society, we're like, well, if I can control everything, then I can make this like perfectly engineered, you know, and that's going to make everything just right, that I can manage everything. But nature has its ways of being efficient as well. And so what we're doing is we're getting like a nutrient-dense water directly to the plant's root systems. What my work is to evaluate approximately what the volume of water they're producing and figure out like how much we can water with it, roughly, you know. But Could they possibly have more stuff growing with the water they're producing? Yeah, they probably could. But they're trying to create we're trying to create more of a natural system that kind of evolves into something that's a lot more resilient and resistant. Whereas like if you have a system that's completely reliant on drip system water, likely if that water gets removed, that system goes away. Whereas this is the kind of system that will keep growing and becoming more and more resilient over time, so that even if the water does get pulled at some point, maybe they go away for 2 weeks on vacation and nobody's showering, the trees are talking to each other through their root systems, through mycelium. There's other plants there that are delivering other kinds of nutrients to the trees and in between the plants, so that they're not completely reliant only on water as their only input. And they're creating their own like shade and habitat and all of that kind of stuff to continue to like evolve together. So is efficiency the same thing if it's human created efficiency versus like a natural, like dynamic system that's evolving?
That's exactly where the value work needs to be done, right? How do we measure value?
Yeah.
And so I want you to think for a second about why would it cost so much to get a permit to do something like this? Like what's going on that there's even such a demand?
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, before you get into that, I'll just caveat that most of that cost was for us to draft the plans to submit to permit.
Okay.
The permit that
But
themselves,
they would require some kind of sophisticated,
exactly,
credentialed plan,
because,
right?
And I'll
Yeah.
give you a different example. Is like in Arizona, you can get like an over-the-counter permit. They make the requirements for gray water use very like transparent. They're like, do these 13 things and we'll give you a permit, you know? And so it's like very available, whereas here gray water is kind of stuffed into a corner and saying like, oh, you're not smart enough to understand this, so you should pay somebody a lot of money so that you can get, you know, this kind of system. And that, so I just want to say like the majority of the cost isn't what the city was charging, it's just a product of a lot of things.
Well, it's all wrapped up in it, right? So the thought experiment is, imagine we live in an area, right? There's canyons and valleys and things like. Imagine if the whole place is covered with concrete. What would happen to the water when it rains? Where's the water go? What's going to happen? If the whole place is covered with concrete, where do you think the water would go? Yeah, well, I guess it would flood, or if it was all concrete, it would run out probably to some source, right? This is why our region has become sort of fixated now on dealing with stormwater runoff, because we're basically laying down impermeable stuff, basically putting a blanket over the earth where the water can't get into the earth and run off in a reasonable way. We get flooding and things like that. So I know one of the things that's happened recently, and I'm going to ask about this ADU, whether they were subjected to this requirement as well. But quite a while ago, about 10, 15 years ago, when I was working with John Robertus at the Water Quality Control Board, the guys were telling me, the people that are concerned about water quality, that the reservoirs where we park our water from up north, it sits in the reservoirs for a while, it doesn't come directly to us. The reservoirs, we didn't need to clean that water because it was clean enough. But because of development around the reservoirs, John and the others are saying, look, if we continue to getting runoff into these reservoirs, we're going to get your checkbooks out, because we're going to have to create another big, gigantic water purification plant, which currently we don't need to do. So they required that new development, say around Otay Mesa and the Otay Reservoir, any new development there, they had to swear on a Bible that the development was not going to increase any additional runoff. So that meant they had to install things like underground water storage or rainwater harvesting or, you know, roofing or permeable pavement. So when this in the neighborhoods, I'm wondering if this is a constraint that also fits here. So when they put this on, now look, it's covering the earth, right? So, but they're capturing their water here. But if they weren't, would this addition of an accessory dwelling unit be challenged in saying that, okay, look, what you just did without the intervention that you're doing just increased runoff from this property. We don't want that to happen. We want to stop the runoff, let it filter into the earth. So is that a condition put down here, that if you do the accessory dwelling unit, you've got to show us how none of that runoff is going to be increased.
I don't think that's in place in the city of San Diego right now.
Okay. Yeah, because I
my
think this is in the
knowledge.
rural areas out near the reservoirs. So this is another example why I think when the city tries to do the right thing in some cases and is looking at sort of how the land is, if it's going to get modified, if you're going to do some modification on the land, what's that going to do to the water? Especially if there's a creek or a river or something like that involved, then you got to do all sorts of permitting for that. But here, I'm guessing maybe not yet. And in any case, you're one step ahead of the game. Because if you did want to do this, then these folks know, well, that's easy enough. We're just going to capture the rainwater or store it. We're going to maybe park some down underground or whatever. You've got these systems. So there's while there's sometimes very good reasons to do these things, like we don't want to have to build another big purification plant, centralized water infrastructure, if we could avoid it. It sometimes creates burdens, like the permitting cost and things like that we have to pay attention to, yeah.
I'm sorry if you already mentioned this.
Oh, that's okay.
I was lost. But did there have to be any lifestyle changes to make sure that the gray water was safe enough to be put in the ground? Because I know some chemicals, like in our shampoo or in our, like, detergent and things like that, aren't necessarily safe. So speaking of runoff and making sure the water stays purified and the land stays clean, did you hear any changes that they had to make, or did you advise on?
Yeah, I do. I have to talk to everybody. Asks those questions, and so we do have to talk through it. You know, a lot of the products that we use have things like nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, NPK as fertilizer. We pay for fertilizer. We go to Home Depot and we buy fertilizer for our plants, but it's coming out of these soaps. So the soaps are not necessarily all bad. But one thing, especially with heavy clay soils like this, is there's a lot of salts in the soaps. And so when salts are aggregated, especially like the city water also, it has a lot of, chlorines and things like that in it as well. But when all of those things are aggregated into a clay soil, since the clay particles are so fine, a lot of those bigger particles can't work their way through the soil, and so they tend to accumulate closer to the surface. Like if you've seen like lawns that are really like compacted, you'll start to see like a white sheen or whatever. It's just all that stuff accumulating, and that'll eventually make it hard for any of the feeder roots of anything to like uptake nutrients and moisture. So finding products that have less salt, so more natural products, fewer ingredients, maybe salt or sodium is listed once or a couple times instead of like 5 or more times, maybe listed later in the ingredients list instead of closer to the top. And then just having healthy soil system, so not compacted clay soil that you're surface flowing water over, but creating that mulch, and system that will help constantly improve the soil system around it by harboring the microbes that are going to start breaking it all down, and then the whole system becomes more absorbent and can process that. Also, we tell people if we can, we'd like to make sure that rainwater overflow flushes through the gray water areas periodically, and that helps push any kind of, any of those elements that are just kind of lingering on the surface, helps push them down through the soil. So for some people, that means they don't have to change their lifestyle. For some people, they do. There's other situations like maybe, everybody's showering in here and all that shower water is going up there. It's a small space. Maybe at some point, they start to see water pooling or it's not soaking in anymore. They're showering too much. They're producing too much water. But that's the benefit of having a diverter valve, which is required, but of using it and saying, well, half the week we'll send it out to the front and half the week we won't. Or, my wife, wants to be able to dye her hair once a week or whatever. That water we don't send out, but we send out all the other. Or, other kind of lifestyle changes that are cool to make these systems work. Some people are like, well, this back shower is not accessible or it's not near the plants that we like to water. So we're just going to make everybody take the showers in the front bathroom now. And so they change their patterns around how they use their house. or if, you know, you go away on vacation and other people come in, you just have to like be conscious about what are they using, what are their patterns, how does that relate to my patterns. I will just say we are very, very removed from our impacts, not only on the broader ecosystem, but more precisely on our very localized backyard ecosystem. And so these kinds of, the people that are interested in these kinds of projects at this point, for the most part, at least at this level, are also very curious about how they're impacting their yards and their ecosystems and like the broader political system. So it's a good match. I think for other people, it's a growing experience, and most people that are just kind of learning about this, their minds get blown, and then they get really excited about like growing stuff and like, you know, how, all these beneficial relationships they're creating. You know, but there's a lot of people out there still who are very disconnected, and it's like, it seems like a big hassle.
Can I just say, so this is so well stated. I love the fact that you asked this behavioral question, because this is a class that's studying planning theories. And one of them is a bioregional approach. And so you just articulated better than I think I've ever heard anybody do it, was that unless we're connected and rooted, unless we re-inhabit where we live and don't live on top of it with pipes underneath that we don't know what goes where or what the implications are, unless we re-inhabit where we live like these folks are doing, when I say re-inhabit, it means what they do, they now understand is connected to the earth under their own 2 feet. And unless we inculcate through the way we operate, live with each other and manage the land, we're never going to get to solve the root problems, because there's a literacy component to that, right? And it's infectious. It's not just greater efficiency. It's a behavioral change. Again, another first principle of bioregional theory, that is, unless we're connected in loving and caring ways with each other and the land, which is a living thing, the land has life in it, it gives us life, that we're not going to get where we got to get. So there are plenty of first principles. That's why I've chosen looking at food and water as the axis around which to propel or advance the bioregional transition. But when you look at that, you know, it's going to be forced on us. This kind of localization and the need for us to re-inhabit where we live is going to be forced on us, because we're going to need the land for food here. We're going to need the water and stuff like that, right?